The sign on the lab door was very clear, but Darren, being the mischievous kid he was, wasn't about to let some stupid warning stop him from possibly seeing a real live dinosaur. The lab he was visiting with his parents had just opened up to the public, offering strictly guided tours to educate people on the genetic science they were working on there. But Darren only wanted to learn about the dinosaur cloning project. He'd always loved dinosaurs and would give anything to see one in real life. Once his tour group took a quick bathroom break, he snuck away down the hall to see the restricted areas, hoping to see a real dinosaur. Much to his disappointment, when he crept into the lab, all he saw was equipment and a bunch of test tubes labeled with scientific words he didn't understand. He picked one up labeled Deinonychus and looked at the amber liquid inside, wondering if this was real dinosaur DNA. Suddenly, he heard a door unlatch behind him. He panicked and tried to put it back, but spilled some on his hand. It tingled a bit as it was absorbed into his skin, but he quickly tried to wipe it off with his shirt and sneak back to the tour group. He breathed a sigh of relief as he met up with his parents again, amazed that he didn't get caught. Finally, the tour ended and the family made their way back home. After chatting about their favorite parts of the tour over dinner, the family began to get ready for bed. Darren changed into his pajamas and was going to lie down and watch YouTube on his phone until he fell asleep, but the hand he had spilled that fluid onto was still bothering him. He looked at his tingling hand and noticed that the skin was unusually rough and almost scaly. The feeling began to intensify as the texture began to spread up his arm. He watched in horror as the scaly green skin rapidly covered his entire body. His hair follicles fell out as the reptilian skin finished covering him, his eyes widening in terror as he watched the hair from his head float down to the floor. "Mom, I need help! Ow!" he screamed as his whole body began to ache. He fell back onto the bed as his limbs began to spasm, contorting into inhuman shapes as his bones began to stretch and pop. "What's going on, honey?" He heard his mom call from her bedroom. He wanted to respond, but as his chest began to widen, he could only take deep breaths to fill his expanding lungs. He rolled around on his bed in pain as his body continued to change, growing longer and wider by the second. His pajamas were shredded by his growing frame, revealing the scaly skin that now covered his body. He pulled his legs towards his chest as his muscles began to cramp. He grabbed them and moaned as his feet began to elongate with gruesome cracks. He watched in terror as his little feet grew into a pair of reptile-like claws, complete with razor-sharp talons bursting out of the end of his fusing toes. He suddenly recognized the shape his feet had taken. They were velociraptor talons. "Moo!" he moaned, struggling to form the words to call his mom with his devolving diaphragm. His cries began to grow deep and primal, almost animalistic, as his leg bones reshaped themselves to fit his new stance. His thighs began to swell with muscle as eons of hunting adaptation filled them with the strength to leap out at prey. He looked down past his changing legs as he felt more pressure building in his spine, forcefully making him taller as a growth began to sprout from the base. He watched in silence as a dinosaur tail grew from his bottom, growing muscles twitching as his new appendage weighed down on his lower body. His mind was racing as he suddenly felt control over his new tail, knowing instinctively that it helped him balance while racing through the jungle. He hadn't even noticed that the scales had covered his pubic area completely, but quickly became aware of the changes down there as he felt an opening beginning to form. He moaned, sounding more like a growl, as his new sex opened up, completely replacing his prepubescent member as it began to drip. He felt alien caverns forming between his legs, the new reptilian reproductive system pumping bestial hormones through his one human body and causing his instincts to grow stronger by the second. He didn't understand why, but he could feel the desire to be filled growing in his mind. The wild pheromones coming from his dripping new sex filled his nostrils. causing him to reluctantly imagine himself laying eggs and caring for his offspring. His tail whipped around the room, knocking his toys off the shelves as he tried to resist his growing instincts. "Roar!" he screamed, trying futilely to call for his parents. His voice sounded just like the simulated raptor roars he'd heard in the movies. He began to flex his chest as it filled with muscle, growing to match the proportions of the rest of his beastly body. He felt the tendons rearranging themselves into a bipedal, hunting form as his arms elongated and pulled themselves towards his chest. He felt his limbs losing mobility as they gained strength, optimizing themselves into tools for an apex predator. He watched his hands in terror as his digits combined and lengthened, sprouting black talons that matched his feet. He rolled around in panic as his body continued to change, tearing his bedsheets with ease as his humanity trickled away. He roared more as he felt his neck thickening and extending, muscle filling it as his vocal cords adapted to his new diaphragm. Just as the final changes were reaching his head, he heard the footsteps of his parents walking towards his door. "Honey, what's that noise? Are you watching Jurassic Park again? Oh my God!" His mother screamed as she opened the door to see a dinosaur laying on her son's bed. She saw Darren's scale-covered face on the body of a terrifyingly large velociraptor, his expression a contorted mix of fear and confusion as he felt a pressure beginning to grow in his skull. The boy could only growl and roar as he looked at his terrified parents, desperately asking for help. They watched in shock as Darren's face began to elongate, his clenched teeth sharpening into fangs as his mouth and nose pushed out into a reptilian muzzle. His growing tongue lashed around his growing mouth, spreading saliva over his piercing new teeth as his sense of smell heightened well beyond any human's. He felt a primal urge to hunt and feed growing in him as his brain began to settle into his new skull. He blinked as his vision began to change, colors intensifying and movement becoming almost slow motion compared to his old human eyes. He looked at his parents one last time as a tear rolled down his cheek before his tear ducts were replaced with a lizard-like film he could use to moisturize his new eyes. They watched in horror as their son's eyes turned from their human hazel color into a pair of reptilian yellow slits, tightening in focus as he looked at them, hungrily. With one final crack, his new jaw settled into place, and Darren's transformation into a female velociraptor was complete. He grumbled as his thoughts grew simple, the lizard brain section of his mind spreading its influence by the second. He tried to form full sentences, full thoughts, full names of the people he loved, but she could only picture what his new body desired: eat, sleep, hunt, find mate, fuck, lay eggs, raise babies. The new raptor roared at the terrified humans standing in the door as she gave in to her new instincts. She intimidatingly stepped towards the humans, drool dripping from her lips as her sex dripped down her legs. She wanted to eat and fuck, and she didn't care in what order. The humans panicked and locked the door before calling 911. It wasn't long before a secretive group of scientists showed up at their house, tranquilizing the creature that used to be their son and transporting her to the research lab where Darren had first spilled the fateful serum on his hand. "I'm so sorry this happened to your son, but please understand that this is an amazing scientific breakthrough. Your son, Darren, has unlocked the genetic code to bring the dinosaurs back to life, even if he did it by accident. He's the first living dinosaur in millions of years. He, or I guess she, is going to be famous. Once we successfully clone a male, she'll be responsible for raising the first natural-born dinosaurs since their extinction." Darren saved an entire species, and you'll be able to visit them whenever you'd like, as long as you keep quiet about all this. Months later, after Darren's parents had begun to recover from what they'd witnessed, they finally decided to visit their raptor at the lab. The couple walked through the sterile environment until they came to the dinosaur living quarters, mocked up to look like a jungle. They watched in silent awe as they saw their former son roaming around with a few other raptors behind bulletproof glass. They felt an odd satisfaction as the creature that used to be their son sniffed another male raptor, crossing necks and intertwining tails in a display of affection. A bittersweet feeling washed over them as they saw the name the scientists had given the raptor: Destiny. Suddenly, Destiny hunched over and began to let out a guttural screech, her legs flexing as she squatted down. To all the humans' amazement, Destiny began to push out her eggs. She roared in pleasure and relief, looking caringly down at her new eggs and gathering them beneath her to keep them warm. She laid down and curled her tail around them as her partner laid next to her. Darren's parents watched somberly, holding hands as they began to think that maybe it really was Darren's destiny to save the dinosaurs.